A poor farmer, on the brink of losing everything, stumbles upon the entrance to a mysterious cave hidden on his own land. He has no idea what lies within, or how this discovery will change his life forever. The morning light crept slowly over the worn fields of the Hardy farm, stretching across uneven rows of soil that had once been fertile but now lay gray and exhausted. Thomas Hardy stood on his porch, shoulders hunched, staring at the horizon as if searching for something that no longer existed. The air was sharp, carrying the dry scent of dust and old wood, and every sound seemed too loud, as though the land itself was reminding him of its emptiness. Crows perched on the split rail fences, watching him with cold black eyes, as if they sensed the weakness of a man who could no longer fight against time or fate. For more than 50 years, this farm had been his world. His grandfather carved it from wilderness. His father endured droughts and storms to keep it alive. Now, in Thomas's hands, the land was slipping away, collapsing inch by inch. The barn, once painted a proud red, had faded to a dull brown, its roof sagging under years of neglect. The tractor sat rusting in the yard, its engine beyond repair, its tires cracked and useless. Even the soil beneath his boots seemed to groan with fatigue when he walked across it. Inside, on the kitchen table, lay the bank's letter. He didn't need to read it again. He knew the words by heart. 3 weeks left. Either pay the debt in full or watch everything auctioned to the highest bidder. Thomas had lived long enough to understand the mathematics of despair. He had already sold off the cattle, then the chickens, then the horses. Piece by piece, the life of the farm had been dismantled until all that remained was an empty shell. A man alone with barren fields and unpaid debts. The loneliness pressed hardest in the evenings. Once, the house had been filled with laughter, clattering dishes, the voices of family. Now, only the wind moaned through the cracks in the walls as Thomas sat by the stove, staring into the flames. The silence was unbearable. There had to be some way to save the farm, some last chance hidden in fate. Yet each imagined solution collapsed against the same wall. No money, no time. He had even thought of selling his father's old rifle, but the price would barely buy food for a week. Work on neighboring farms? Impossible. Jobs were scarce, and younger men were already waiting. Each path led nowhere. Then came the storm. It arrived in the night with a violence that shook the farmhouse timbers and rattled the glass in the windowpanes. Rain slashed across the roof like thrown gravel. Wind roared down from the hills, bending skeletal trees until they groaned. Thomas lay awake, listening as the heavens tore themselves open above his land. This storm felt different, almost purposeful, as if the sky itself was trying to strip away what little remained of his world. By morning, branches and shingles littered the farmyard, but what caught Thomas's eye was not the wreckage, it was the ridge beyond the fallow field. The hillside looked altered, as though the storm had bitten into the earth. From his porch it was only a dark smudge, but something about it held him. By midday, curiosity overcame him. He descended into the ravine, the ground slick and treacherous beneath his boots. At the base of the cliff, he found it, a jagged opening, black and uninviting, where no cave had been before. A cold draft whispered from its mouth, smelling of stone, damp earth, and something metallic, faintly sour. At first, Thomas told himself to leave it. The land was full of hidden dangers, sinkholes, wells that turned bitter, caves that collapsed, but the pull was relentless. The cave felt as though it had been waiting. By afternoon, he could resist no longer. He gathered his tools, an old lantern, a fraying rope, his father's pick, and returned to the ravine. When he stooped and stepped inside, the first breath of air chilled him to the bone. His boots scraped stone, echoes magnifying until they sounded eternal. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow rhythms. The narrow passage pressed against his shoulders before widening into a chamber. There he saw it. Blackened patches of ash, charred timber, signs of fire, signs of men. Thomas's heart quickened. Someone had been here long ago. His land, his failing, dying land, hid a history he had never imagined. Symbols carved into the rock walls whispered of stories he could not read. Rusted rails half buried in debris stretched forward into darkness. Men had once cut tunnels here. They had mined, labored, sweated. And then, on the 7th day of exploring, Thomas's pick struck something that did not sound like stone. The echo rang like a bell. Trembling, he cleared the soil until a corner of iron gleamed beneath his lantern light. He clawed away more dirt until he uncovered a strongbox, reinforced with iron, scarred but intact. With shaking hands, he pried open the rusted lock. The lid creaked, and lantern light spilled across rows of dull shapes. Gold bars stacked in neat rows, coins wrapped in decayed cloth, documents bound with twine, brittle but legible. Thomas lifted one bar, its staggering weight nearly buckling his arm. His heart thundered. This was enough to pay his debts, enough to save the farm, perhaps even enough to dream again. And yet, even as hope surged through him, another feeling stirred, a shadow. Because treasures buried in darkness are never abandoned without reason, the storm still rages. Rain hammers the roof, lightning tears across the black sky. The lonely farmhouse crouches against the wind like an animal bracing for the kill. Int. Farmhouse, night. Thomas Hardy, 60s, weathered and wiry, sits at the kitchen table. The bank's letter lies before him. His rough hands grip it so tightly the paper crumples. Thunder rattles the window panes. He stares, hollow-eyed, then shoves the letter away. Sound. A low, distant rumble, not thunder, something deeper. Thomas rises, uneasy. He crosses to the window. Beyond the fields, on the ridge, something shifts. The earth itself seems broken open. Ext. Ravine. Next day, mud squelches under Thomas's boots as he descends the storm-carved ravine. He stops, staring at the dark maw torn into the cliffside. A cave, silent, waiting. For a long moment, he hesitates. Then he pulls the lantern from his pack, lights it, and steps inside. Int. Cave. Continuous. The passage presses narrow, walls dripping with condensation. Thomas's lantern light flickers across markings, strange symbols etched into the stone. He runs his calloused fingers over them, frowning. The tunnel widens into a chamber. Charred wood, blackened ash, the remains of an old campfire. Thomas swallows hard. This is no natural cave. Someone worked here, long ago. Int. Cave. 7th day of digging, night. Thomas, sweat-streaked and exhausted, swings his pick into the wall. Clang, not stone. The sound rings metallic, hollow. His breath quickens. He drops to his knees, clearing away dirt with frantic hands until a corroded iron corner emerges. A strongbox. Int. Cave. Later, the box sits before him. Lantern light glints off its rusted lock. Thomas wedges his father's chisel into the seam and slams it with the pick. The lock snaps. He lifts the lid. Inside, gold bars, coins, bundles of paper, faded and brittle. Thomas's mouth falls open. His lantern trembles in his hand. For a moment, he can only stare. Then, with trembling fingers, he lifts a bar, heavy, real. Close on Thomas, tears glisten in his weary eyes. Relief floods his face. For the first time in years, hope returns. But then, sound. From deep in the tunnels, a faint echo, the scrape of stone on stone. Thomas freezes, holding his breath. His lantern flame flickers. The sound comes again, louder now. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something moving. Thomas lowers the gold bar, eyes fixed on the dark beyond his lantern's reach. Int. Cave. Dark tunnel, continuous. The blackness seems to breathe. A presence, watching, dread. The cave had not surrendered its secret easily, and secrets like these were never meant to remain hidden forever. When Thomas left the cave that evening, after wrapping the chest in canvas and hiding it beneath brush near the ravine, he felt an odd lightness. His boots sank into the soft soil as he climbed back toward the farmhouse. But his heart rose higher than it had in decades. The farm looked different in the twilight. The broken fences, the leaning barn, once symbols of failure, now seemed like challenges he could overcome. He would restore this place. He would honor the memory of his father and grandfather. He would live again. But hope never comes alone. The next morning, as he walked into town for supplies, Thomas noticed the way people looked at him. Their eyes lingered longer than usual, and conversations hushed as he passed. One man nodded politely, yet curiosity burned in his gaze, as though he knew something had changed. News traveled fast in small towns, faster than truth, faster than caution. A chill passed through Thomas. Someone already suspected. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Thomas stood on his porch and thought he saw a figure at the edge of his land. It slipped into the trees before he could be certain, but the feeling remained. He was not alone. Someone had noticed his comings and goings, perhaps even followed him to the ravine. The gold had saved him, but it had also painted a target on his back. In the days that followed, strangers began to linger near the farm. Men in town asked too many questions. A pair of riders appeared more than once on the ridge above his fields. The world that had seemed so empty was suddenly alive with watchful eyes. Fear returned to Thomas, heavier now, sharpened by greed. He began locking his doors at night, something he had never done before. Sleep came fitfully, broken by every creak of the floorboards and every rustle of wind against the shutters. Still, he returned to the cave. He could not stay away. The documents promised more than gold. They spoke of untapped veins, riches still waiting in the dark. The thought intoxicated him, yet each time he stepped into that silence, he carried the memory of the shadow on his land. He worked more quickly now, hands trembling with urgency and dread. The cave had given him salvation, but it had also summoned danger. One night, after covering the chest with brush, he heard hoofbeats on the road. He froze, crouched low in the shadows, listening. The horses drew nearer, deliberate, unhurried. Then they stopped. Voices murmured too low to make out, bridles jingling in the dark. His heart hammered. He pressed deeper into the shadows until, at last, the riders moved on, their hoofbeats fading into distance. He didn't rise until the night was utterly still again. By the time he staggered back to the farmhouse, sweat-soaked and trembling, he understood. The cave had changed everything. It had given him hope, yes, but it had also awakened the hunger of others. The gold was no longer safe, and neither was he. The farm no longer felt abandoned. It felt crowded with unseen presences. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of porch boards, every distant crack of a branch whispered of eyes watching. Dreams turned restless. Gold in his hand one moment, unseen hands tearing it away the next. And then they came. At dusk, 3 men appeared at the end of his drive. Their horses tossed and stamped, uneasy with the tension in the air. The men called out in voices meant to sound friendly, but Thomas saw the hardness in their eyes. They said they had heard stories, old mines rediscovered, treasure found in the hills. Perhaps, they suggested, Thomas had stumbled upon something while tending his land. Their words were casual, but their hands lingered near their pistols, gleaming in the fading light. Thomas told them there was nothing but rock and dirt on his property, that he had no time for ghost tales. They laughed, mocking him, and when they rode away their laughter echoed long after they were gone. It was not the sound of men defeated, it was a promise they would return. That night, Thomas sat on his porch with a rifle across his knees. It hadn't been fired in years, but the weight was steadying. He thought of his father, of the hard men who had once fought for less than gold. He thought of the documents hidden beneath his kitchen floorboards, their maps, ledgers, and seals proving ownership. The gold itself could be stolen, but the papers, properly delivered, could secure a claim no thief could erase. He made a choice. He would take them to town. The next morning, burdened by the weight of generations, he carried the papers to the courthouse. The lawyer he met there, a man respected for decades, studied them with deepening surprise. The records were old, but genuine. They bore the seal of a company long gone, and contained maps showing not only what had been mined, but what remained. If Thomas pressed forward, the lawyer explained, he could legally claim the mineral rights beneath his land. The fight would be costly, long, and dangerous, but it was winnable. When Thomas returned home that evening, he found his gate broken, the barn door ajar. Nothing was stolen. There was little worth taking, but the message was clear. Someone had been searching. From that day, the struggle grew harsher. Strangers became bolder. Neighbors came, claiming the mines were their inheritance, stolen by greedy companies long ago. They accused Thomas of hoarding wealth while others suffered. Their words carried bitterness, heavy with history. Thomas told them the truth. The law recognized no inheritance without records. The only record lay in his hands. They left angry, but anger never dies quickly. Nights became battles. Footsteps prowled near his porch. Shadows tested his door. He watched them through cracked shutters, rifle steady in shaking hands. The farm was no longer a refuge, it was a battleground. But when the boldest of them forced their way to the cave itself, torches flickering against stone. Thomas found his voice. He told them the truth. The gold alone meant nothing. Without the documents, there was no claim, no protection, no law. His words struck harder than his rifle ever could. Some men spat and left, cursing. Others lingered, dangerous. Yet Thomas had crossed a line. He was no longer a man waiting to lose everything. He was a man willing to fight for it. In the weeks that followed, he pressed his claim in court. The law was slow, but steady. Papers were signed, notarized, and compared with dusty county records. Slowly, the foundation of ownership became unshakable. Even the sheriff, once suspicious, returned to the farm not with questions, but with recognition. The county would uphold his rights. Soon, workmen came. The cave was no longer a secret of shadows. It became the start of something new. Stakes were driven into the soil. Laughter replaced whispers of trespassers. Machinery echoed through the ravine. The farm was reborn. Debts were paid. Roofs were mended. Fences stood tall again. Livestock returned to the fields. And in the evenings, Thomas sat on his porch, watching the land glow gold in the sunset, not with coins, but with life. He remembered the shadows, the greed, the men who had tried to take it from him. He remembered fear, but he also remembered resolve. Wealth could corrupt, but it could also build. If tempered with fairness, he paid his workers promptly, listened to their warnings, and rebuilt not as a monument to pride, but as a home for generations to come. One evening, as summer deepened, Thomas walked to the ravine alone. The men were gone for the day. The cave lay still in twilight. He touched the stone at its mouth and felt not dread, but gratitude. This place had tested him. It had nearly broken him, but it had also remade him. As the stars rose and the land breathed quietly around him, Thomas finally understood. The cave was never just a hole in the earth. It was a threshold, and he had crossed it, from despair into hope, from defeat into renewal. He no longer feared the shadows. The fire within him burned steady, like the earth itself, and he knew, whatever came next, he was ready.
If this tale moved you, if you felt the tension, the heartbreak, and the triumph, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more thrilling, emotional, and inspiring stories your way. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Do you believe dogs have an extraordinary sixth sense? Share your thoughts and personal stories with us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.